Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill Harmer, and I am really excited that you're here tonight. We are very lucky to be hosting this conversation. John Sayles is one of those rare artists whose career has unfolded entirely on his own terms. For more than 4 decades, he has been a defining voice in independent American storytelling, moving between film and fiction with a steady moral compass and a deep respect for people and place. As a filmmaker, he helped shape what independent American film could be. Films that we know and adore like Matawan, 8 Men Out, City of Hope, Passion Fish, and Lone Star didn't just tell stories. They trusted audiences to engage with history, labor, race, and power without being talked down to. His screenwriting earned 2 Oscar nominations. But just as importantly, his work showed that stories about working people and contested histories could live at the center of American culture. As a novelist, he has carried that same sensibility to the page across 8 novels, including his latest, Crucible, which is going to be on sale tonight. In a recent interview, John described a crucible not just as something used to melt metal, but as a place where different elements collide and real reactions happen. That idea sits at the heart of the book. Crucible is set in Detroit during the Depression era, a city that became a meeting point for enormous forces: industrial power, labor movements, immigration, and racial tension. I grew up in the Metro Detroit area, and this book felt much less like history and more like memory to me. Not personal memory, but civic memory. That is something that John Sayles does remarkably well. While Henry Ford looms large over the novel, the book is really about the culture of uncertainty and control that surrounded him, and the belief that success alone grants the right to decide how people should live. The story also reaches beyond Detroit to Ford's failed experiments in the Amazon, a reminder of how unchecked power tends to repeat itself. What makes Crucible so compelling is that none of this is abstract. It lives through a human cast of characters, famous and forgotten, navigating forces much larger than themselves. The book reminds us that many of the tensions we think of as modern have been with us for a long time. We're also fortunate to have our good friend and fellow Westporter, Trey Ellis, with us tonight. Trey is a novelist, a playwright, and filmmaker himself. There isn't a better person to be in conversation with John Sayles tonight than Trey. So without further ado, thank you all again for being here tonight. And what do you say we give a warm Westport welcome to John Sayles and Trey Ellis.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. If you hold this upside down, that stuff on the top, you'll see that it's actually the parking lot at the River Rouge factory. And all those little bumps there are automobiles that have just been manufactured. Henry Ford set up the River Rouge, which was kind of one of the 8 wonders of the world in its time, so that he owned coal mines, he owned iron ore, he owned pretty much everything that went into making an automobile, except the rubber, which is why he eventually went to Brazil. Those raw materials could enter one end of the River Rouge factory, and in less than 48 hours, a Model T or a Model A would come out the other end. So it was, he was brilliant at certain things. The little section I'm gonna read from you first, it's just 1930. We're in Detroit. Prohibition is still in effect. And the main character we're going to deal with is Kazimir Pilsudski, Kaz, who works at Ford's River Rouge factory on the assembly line, and his father, Prokop, who is recently laid off and worked there pretty much the minute he got to America. The old man is making galupki. The smell of boiling cabbage always makes Kaz miss his Muthka, who cooked them on the stove every Saturday for the big family meal, which also meant mashed potatoes and goulash with plum jam filling. Most days it was soup and bread, but Saturdays and Sundays there were family meals, usually at the house of his uncle Stanislas, who was the first to come over from Poland and worked in a butcher shop in Hamtramck. The old man has an incredible head of hair, white now, starting at a point low in the center of his forehead and standing almost straight up on its own. As he cooks, he hums from Paul Whiteman's Whispering, which has become his favorite radio song. He seems in a very good mood for a man who has recently lost his job. You know, Pop, Kaz opens, his father never a man to welcome help. I got way too much coal over at the house right now. I could bring some over. I got the coal, says the old man. Oh, this stock market deal, it served them right. The old man turns the burner off, carefully brings the pot to the sink and flips it, boiled head of cabbage plopping with a cloud of steam into the colander set there. It is cold in the kitchen, but no colder than they kept it when Kaz was a boy. You let strangers gamble you money? What do you think happened? Which bank have you got yours in now, Pop? I got money rolled in sock. Hide it where I show you later. I die, you know where to find him. You keep it in the house? The old man runs cold water over the cabbage. He is not a patient cook. Banks are run by Jew. You let Jew near your money, you lose it, like Father Coughlin is always saying. The old man has been listening to the Radio Priest broadcasts since he started on WJR, calling it Betherland newspaper. He has the set on whenever Kaz comes by after work, usually turned to the Philco Hour on the Blue Network or a new show called Amos and Andy. J.P. Morgan wasn't a Jew, Pop, is what they want you to think. Kaz has only almost $200 in the Guardian Bank, and Molly, whose people have been here since the Civil War, says it would be cowardly to pull it out because of some panic in New York. The old man starts to separate the cabbage leaves and lay them out on a plate. They get together, filled with numbers. Mr. Ford writes this in his newspaper. He already apologized for that, Pop, is what they want you to think. The old man has worked for Ford since Highland Park was new, just short of 20 years, helping to fill the roads with Model Ts, and remains fervently loyal despite the fact that at the end of the shift one day, his foreman told him, without apology, explanation, or the courtesy of eye contact, go collect your time and hand in your ID badge. Kaz sits in his old chair at the table that always needs a piece of folded cardboard under one leg to keep it from wobbling, tall enough now that his knees touch the underside. Growing up, he rarely saw the old man except at this table. Do you know what you're going to do now? The old man begins to roll kasha and ground meat mix in the wilted cabbage leaves, pondering this. Other places making cars. None of them pay like Ford. The old man shrugs. Something is better than empty hand. At the beginning, Pop was fitting engine blocks into chassis, wielding a winch while sidestepping along the line, then on to axle assembly and a half dozen other jobs, often the man chosen to inaugurate a new procedure before the move to the Rouge. At the Rouge, they've had him mounting tires, which requires a lot of bending. They shouldn't be letting veteran workers go. Mr. Ford has plan. I am not part of it. When Kaz was growing up, the Ford people were in the house every other week. The sociological department brains, for they were mostly college graduates, telling his mother what and how to cook, and checking on school attendance and brushing teeth and table manners, and having them read the Rules for Living pamphlet, and insisting that the old man, who at that time spoke little English and could not read, put his meager savings in a bank that they had already approved of. Most nights after his shift, he was expected at their English school, coming home to try his new phrases. Albert watches the crows, or see the yellow double dog run, on Kaz and his brother Leon. It was embarrassing at first, and then their matka explained that they were working for Ford too, the whole family, and that the pay, $2.50 a day at first, and then an amazing $5, had to be earned by all. And each week, the old man grew a little smarter, no longer just an ignorant Polak who muttered at them in a language they devalued and barely understood, but a man with feelings and opinions he could share with them. On the day of his graduation from the English school, there was a ceremony. Family members invited to sit in bleachers and applaud as their breadwinners, now considered by the government to have filed their first papers and to have renounced the country of their birth, received a diploma while a band played stirring music. When Prokop Pilsudski was called out, the old man appeared wearing the striped pants, Cossack boots, embroidered red vest, and four-cornered black krakushka hat that he'd borrowed from his friend Jacek, graduated the previous year, who in turn had bought it from Gombrowicz, the baker, who had it all made for him to march in a Kosciuszko Day parade. Pop crossed the boards to the band's shaky mazurka, received his scroll, then quickly descended steps into a giant fabricated melting pot at the front of the stage, reappearing moments later dressed in a suit jacket, high collar, and tie, acknowledging the applause by waving the little American flag in his hand. From that day on, he'd correct anybody calling themselves Polish-American with his instructor's admonition. That hyphen, she is a minus sign. Having then qualified for his profit participation of an extra $2.50 a day, the old man's English was good enough to smugly correct his wife's attempt to speak it, as well as understand that citizenship was not the ocean liner Mr. Ford chartered to sail to Europe and call off the Great War. He now claimed that Poland was not even country, while cursing Russia, Germany, and Austria for appropriating chunks of it. And though the sociological department was eventually disbanded, the old man still keeps his marriage license framed on the wall and his vodka hidden beneath the coal chute in the cellar. The old man has a sauce he's made from canned tomatoes already warming in a skillet, and he lays the cabbage rolls carefully in this and turns up the flame. Kaz's matka used to bake them in the oven, but the old man lacks the patience for this. I maybe go to Dodge, Maine in Hamtramck, ask to work there. The Victory 6. The old man shrugs, gives the skillet a shake. Is automobile, I can make. Kaz has a friend, Grablunas, a Lithuanian kid he knew in high school, who does something with a rivet gun at Dodge. Worse pay, but a more relaxed shop, according to him, though you can still get called out for stealing time if you stop to scratch your nuts. Kaz can't tell yet whether the old man being let go was just an individual thing, or if the company is reacting to this stock market deal and expecting sales to plummet. Only last winter, Mr. Ford announced to the world that he was set to hire 30,000 new workers. Kaz's little brother Leon was one of the multitude who showed up in the freezing cold the night before to get in line. It turned into a riot. Some men allowed in, others turned away with no explanation. Harry Bennett's service department thugs turning a fire hose on the ones who protested and wouldn't go away. Leon mentioned both Kaz and the old man during his very short interview, but wasn't given a job. Bud Novak at the plant says it was only a show, a chance for the company to let a bunch of workers go for a few weeks, putting a scare into them, then hire them back at beginner's wages. But Bud is always kicking about something. And Kaz is secretly relieved that his brother, short of temper and loose of tongue since birth, was not hired at the Rouge. Kaz gets up to grab plates, forks, and knives, parked where they always were, and lays them out. Setting the table was his responsibility as a kid, guided on a visit by a young sociological who sighed a lot and insisted that a full set of utensils be displayed, even if they were only having soup. You know, Pop, he ventures again, if you need anything, you take care of home family, the old man interrupts. I am getting by without problem. On Kaz's 16th birthday, the old man bought him to see his foreman, who sent him to see the little man in the basement of the engineering building. Harry Bennett asked Kaz about his short career playing football at Highland Park High School before putting him on the line as a trainee, starting after lunch. On Edsel Ford's 21st birthday, a few years earlier, his father, Henry, gave him $1 million worth of gold bullion. Prokop Pilskodsky, who as a young man lived under the Tsar, is still pleased by this. If you are king, you let world know who is prince. There was a loud knock at the door. The old man's brother Stanislas died last year. Leon is in Chicago making tractors. Nobody just drops by here on a miserable winter night. The old man turns the flame off and wipes his hands on a dish towel as he heads for the door, grinning. Was mistake. I knew this. They have come to give me back badge. The man at the door, face mostly hidden by a woolen muffler, is canvassing for the upcoming election. The old man, trying to hide his disappointment, asks him in. I'm a booster for Bowles, says the visitor. Kaz, an irregular but opinionated voter, has seen the campaign posters in the city. The guy who always runs. He beat Lodge in the primary this year. Bowles sees the big picture, which is police reform. Do you know how much illegal liquor comes across that river every night? As much as the people can drink. Michigan went dry even before the Volstead Act turned the nation's taps off, to no one's benefit in Kaz's mind, except for the bootleggers and the corrupt cops they pay off. So you're anti-prohibition? Asked the booster. Kaz shrugs. You never know when some service department spy will be lurking in a speakeasy, taking names, so he drinks, when he does, at the house of his buddy Jake, who's a barge pilot and always has a bottle or two. They all say police reform, he says to the canvasser. That and extending the streetcar lines. Well, the other thing that Bowles guarantees, says the man, looking over his shoulder toward the door and lowering his voice as if someone might be eavesdropping, is to keep the jigs in line. Now, Kaz remembers, this is the candidate of the outfit who wear the pointy-headed robes, who are down on Catholics nearly as much as they are on the colored. That's good, says the old man, still moping because the knock wasn't Henry Ford coming to apologize. Somebody got to do it. Pop, when did you ever have trouble with colored people? They shoot you, he says, right out from their window. There was a big case a few years back, a Negro doctor named Sweet who moved into a white neighborhood, and when a mob of unhappy neighbors started throwing rocks through his windows, he retaliated with the help of friends and families by firing into the crowd and killing at least one of them. Headlines, court cases, Clarence Darrow over from Chicago to help defend the doctor from murder charges. Kaz remembers it dragging on and eventually being thrown out of court. What would you do, Pop, if a bunch of colored people came and started throwing rocks through your window? I call the cops. You don't have a telephone, cop. I don't have a rifle, neither. My man gets to be mayor, promises the canvasser. We'll have some laws in Detroit about who can move in where, just like they do in near Dearborn. Buddy, you're in Dearborn." The man looked stricken, nose red and running from the cold, the snow on his brogans melting on the floor. "You're kidding me." 1 block across the line. "Don't they hand you people a map?" The canvasser pulls out a folded piece of paper, unfolds and stares at it. "Pop votes in Dearborn when he votes." Son of a gun. Kaz votes when he votes in Hamtramck, but doesn't want to get into that with this character. But before he can move to show him the door, the man's head pops up like a hunting dog in a deer thicket. "Say," says the boomer for bowls, "is that Golubki I smell?" I'm going to read you another little piece. This is a couple years later. It's actually 1940. And the one character you haven't met here is Ernest Leibold, who was the press agent for Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company. Perfect name for a press agent, Ernest Leibold. And he has a lot to answer for. They send a man up from the photo department to record the honor. Ernest Leibold will make certain the picture is seen by the right people, as the Detroit papers, which he doesn't trust, have not been invited. He suggested to Mr. Ford that he wear a light-colored suit, knowing that the sash the cross is hung on is red and will show up in dark in a black and white news photograph. The medal hung on it is a beauty, a white Maltese cross with golden eagles in the crook of each arm, a golden swastika and the white disc in their claws. The star pinned on his breast pocket is similar and even more dazzling. There has been so much misunderstanding in the American press of the German position, and Leibold hopes that Mr. Ford's acceptance of the award on his 75th birthday and the Führer's lauding of Ford's humanitarian ideals and contributions to peace will help the people open their minds. Heller, the German consul here in Detroit and in charge of this ceremony in Mr. Ford's office, has told him that Charles Lindbergh is expected to receive the honors sometime soon. There will be some naysayers, of course, Harry Bennett bleating his usual noise from the sidelines. But if America's peaceful relations with the Reich are to be maintained, and more importantly, the company's sales and manufacturing interests they are best served, this is a proud moment, and one that Ernest Leibold can take a good deal of credit for. Mr. Ford has gotten so much better at accepting the honors due to him, though he asked that there not be too much fuss. The run for U.S. Senate back in 1918 hurt him terribly, of course, falling short by a mere 8,000 votes to that scoundrel Newberry. Electing senators by popular vote was very new then, and the company had so many fewer employees to rely on. Mr. Ford has, deservingly, been celebrated often over the years, and people understand that attaching his name to their charity or cause has an enormous benefit, to the point where Leibold must turn down at least 1 or 2 offers a week. But a first-class Grand Cross Order of the German Eagle in gold with star does not materialize every day. Thanks. Trey's going to come up and we're going to talk for a little bit. I was reminded that this is stage left. I haven't been on the stage for quite a while.
Thank you so much. I'm a John Sayles super fan, so this is really terrific. I'm just briefly, I was coming back from Metro North a couple, maybe this summer, and I see this guy just by himself in a really crowded train. I said, "You look," and I didn't know who. I thought it was like a worker. I think you had like a white T-shirt on, and then he pulls out a MacBook and he starts like typing. And I said, "I think it's John Sayles. I really think this is John Sayles." And I said, "Are you John Sayles?" And he said, "Yes, you are." And then I just, babbled about all the. As a novelist and a screenwriter as well, you really blaze a trail that I think that you've just been my hero for so long. So this is a real treat.
Great. Don't get lost on the trail.
And this book, I'd like to talk about Crucible. It's an amazing book, and hearing what you, can you talk about all the different voices? Because it really is it's a tour de force of different voices. Like the scope of the book is just breathtaking.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times when I look at a situation, I feel like, well, whose eyes are we going to see it? You know, I obviously wasn't there. It's set between 1927 and 1942. Who's there to see it? And how does that, you know, if they wrote their novel, what would it be? And you realize, oh, there's like 7 different people, and they'd write totally different versions of this because of where they're coming from and what they get to see, and you know who they are, just kind of personally, their personality. So I have a couple workers. Kaz Pilsudski, who you met, is on the assembly line. He's a second-generation Ford worker. There's a character named Zeke Crowder who came up, I think he's from Arkansas, and he came up like a lot of black people came up when it was Ford is paying black workers the same as he's paying white workers, and it's $2.50 an hour, you know, which was a huge deal.
Talk a little bit about Inkster too.
Yeah, and there were a couple kind of traditionally black neighborhoods. 2 of them were right in Detroit. One was called Paradise Valley. The other was called Black Bottom, had become Black Bottom before black people came there to live. Black Bottom had actually been historically Jewish, and they still owned some of the stores, but had moved out as black people moved in. And then there was a community pretty far down the trolley line called Inkster that was mostly probably about 60% African American, and at one point they were having a hard time kind of making it and paying police and having lights and stuff like that. And Henry Ford kind of bought the community, and because so many of the people there worked for him. But what happened is he also docked their pay a certain amount for paying back for the lighting and the security and those kind of things. Eventually, the community started to fail, and a lot of those workers had to move in to other neighborhoods to work. Even in the North, there were no other places that were paying black people the same as white people. And what eventually happened, and what you know, you end up finding Zeke in the foundry, and the foundry is where you use a crucible to pour molten metal into the head blocks of engines and stuff like that to cast them. It's one of the more dangerous jobs, and it certainly is one not so much hard work, but really, really hot. And you're sweaty all the time, and there's smoke in your eyes, and you're kind of feeding the fire at hell. And that had originally been mostly Polish and Italian workers, and as they kind of assimilated and moved on to other parts of the factory, it became where most of the black workers worked, and they were considered strike insurance. By Harry Bennett, who was kind of the enforcer for Henry Ford. Oh, who else is going to pay them the same as the white people are getting? They'll never go on strike. And then there's a young Jewish woman, Rosa Schimmel, who's at the moment she's a Communist Party member, but that changes throughout the novel, and she's always up for a march or to support a new union. The Ruther brothers make a little appearance, the guys who kind of started the UAW. You meet both Henry Ford and Edsel Ford, who's kind of a tragic character, who was the son of Henry Ford. You meet Harry Bennett, who was this very entertaining guy, who was this little Napoleon. He didn't, unfortunately, get fired early enough like the head of ICE just did, Bovino, but cut from the same cloth. So you meet a lot of people, and because it takes place over a long time, you start to meet their kids, and their kids start to grow up. And I realized as I was writing it, oh, geez, Zeke's oldest kid, he'll either enlist or he'll be drafted. World War II is breaking out. So, once you get these people started, you have to realize, oh, they're going to have to roll with things. Kaz's wife, Molly, is taking care of 3 kids, and one of them has cerebral palsy, and so that's no picnic. But then World War II breaks out, and she's doing Rosie the Riveter stuff at the Willow Run factory because they need people and they need the money.
And you'll see that when you read the book, each section, there's a different voice. So the Italian gangsters have a voice. Mm-hmm. The people, obviously, Flavio and the people in Fabio and the people in Brazil have a different voice. So it's just the breadth of it reminded me a little bit of Doctor's Ragtime. Mm-hmm. Were you thinking, was that at all in your mind?
Yeah, Ragtime's an interesting thing because it's written such a style. The style never changes, but he does drop the needle on all these different people to tell the story of the time. And it's something I've done in movies and in books before. One of the nicest things about writing a historical novel, and not all my fiction is historical fiction, is somebody has written your plot for you, and a timeline. And so you look at the arc of what happened, and when I start these books, I don't know all the things that, oh, wow, that happened. There's a race riot, in the early 40s I did not know about. I knew about the 68 one, right. With the Algiers motel incident and stuff in Detroit, but I did not know about this other one. I knew about the, name your race riot, but this one I did not know about. And then, so you kind of pick, okay, what are the events, if I'm going to really tell this story, do I have to go to? And then you say, well, who of my characters would be or should be there? And maybe 3 of them are. And so you get to see that incident from 3 points of view instead of just one.
And it also made me think of Matewan in terms of I really remember really well, you have a scene where the Italian immigrants are there and they pick up this thing and they don't know what it is and they go, oh, aglio, and mm-hmm. it's garlic, and the hill, the hill people are doing something else, and the black workers, mm-hmm. they're all together. So was there any...
Yeah, it was, why the book is called Crucible is because it's something beyond a melting pot. Melting pot is this kind of nice image of, you're kind of stirring it with a wooden spoon. A crucible is, in a research laboratory, it's where you mix chemicals together and you hope they don't blow up, or maybe you hope they do blow up, depending on what you're trying to invent. It's kind of a crunch whenever there's a crucible involved. And for me, what fascinated me about Detroit was how it was always this kind of meeting point for Prohibition. There it is, just below, Canada, Windsor's on the other side. There's a big brewery there. All the good stuff that came in during Prohibition came in through Detroit. So they had a very lively, gangster population, and battles between them and kidnappings and that kind of thing. There they were when the automobile industry started and unionization, it was the perfect place to unionize. Once you've built the River Rouge, you've put so much money into it, you can't just pick up and go away. And that's when unions can really kind of get their hooks in. And then the same thing happened with race. When that big diaspora happened to Chicago, Detroit was the other place where, people just went like crazy because there was work there. And pretty soon you had a relative there, or you knew, people would say, what happened to Detroit is there was one church, and there was a guy who actually got paid a little bit by Henry Ford to vet people, but he put in a good word for you. And he, if you added it up, he was a good guy. There were some other guys who were just taking the money and kind of steering people wrong. So, all those things coming together, you want a lot of points of view, but also you really want to tell the whole story, and you look at Detroit and you can't tell the story of Detroit without race. You can't tell it without Ford. You can't even tell it without Joe Louis, because he's at this time.
And did this story, because we'll talk a little bit about how you switched from media, and did it always begin as a novel, or did you think of it being?
Yeah, some of my inspiration of it came from other things. So in a funny way, there's a wonderful book by Greg Grandin that's a nonfiction book called Fordlandia, which is about this adventure, experiment, whatever you want to call it, that Ford did, where he decided, I'm going to grow my own rubber, I'm going to buy a chunk of the Amazon in Brazil, the size of the state of Connecticut, and I'm going to have the world's biggest, rubber plantation. It did not work out so well, but he tried to do it. And I was hired by some, or asked by some people, I never got paid anything, who were producers, to see if I could help them pitch this idea as a miniseries. And we went around and we never got any traction with it. But I was just kind of, because I'd been thinking about Detroit for so long and writing something. I said, well, here's the imperialist side of it. This is where somebody who thinks he can tell people how to live, like, in the little bit I read you, and have a sociological department come and tell you, oh, you're not cleaning your dishes right, and, your kids have to do this, and you can't have borders and all that kind of stuff. I can do that on an international scale. I could kidnap the, president of Venezuela and run the country better than he could. So that kind of got me feeling, oh, there's really a book there. It's not a miniseries. We can't do the River Rouge. Even with CGI and all this modern stuff, we couldn't recreate that to put you in that factory. But I can write a novel about this.
Yeah, we were saying before, I grew up in Ypsilanti with the famous Willow Run factory, and a lot of the people where I grew up, my folks were young academics going to U of M, but all my friends were all of their parents worked at the factory. Just the whole town was working for them.
Yeah, I grew up in Schenectady, New York, which is where the General Electric company was. There's almost nothing left of it anymore, and pretty much 80% of the people you knew had some tie to it. Kurt Vonnegut was their PR guy for a while, in-house PR guy for a while, to make a living. The same thing happened to Schenectady that happened to Detroit, is one by one, this building left down to Saipan, this one went to, somewhere else in the world where there was no union, and pretty soon, there's like a third of your population to half of your population is gone. There aren't many jobs anymore. You have a lot of empty houses, and people are struggling.
The other amazing thing about this book, I think, is we think, obviously the news today, it feels like the world's on fire. And, growing up in the 70s, it felt pretty calm, relatively calm after the 60s. But looking at this, this world from the 30s to the 40s in Detroit, there's several riots, there's several fights, there are assassinations, it seems like almost weekly. It was the Wild West.
Yeah, things were forming. Big things were, it's kind of like if you look at a river, when it ices over, there's that point where it's pushing and the ice just gets thrown up into these strange shapes. The labor movement was one of them. People were coming out of that kind of robber baron, era where there were no unions and the government did not support the unions. That doesn't really happen, and the UAW doesn't really get any traction until FDR comes in the early 30s. Until then, the cops, the army, the government is against you if you're trying to form a union, so you're getting no help from anybody. Europe is in a mess. Germany's starting to, move outside and take over little countries, and people are worried about that. The racial situation in the United States, in the South, there's terrible lynching still. People are you didn't get to just, get on a train or even walk out of one of those towns. You had to escape those towns because usually there was somebody who thought you owed them money, or even if you didn't, they knew, well, I'm going to need that guy and, his back or his crops or something next year, and, I need his vote and this and that. He can't leave. So people left at the dead of night. And where'd they go, And then their relatives were watched because, they may go next. So that was very volatile. And then in 1929, the stock market crashes. And the auto industry, which is really growing, has to deal with that. So it was a really, really volatile time. And you always have to, it's something I always talk to actors about. The people in this book, they haven't seen the movie. They haven't watched the History Channel. They don't know how it's going to turn out. So Rosa Schimmel honestly thinks, if only the Communist Party can grow a little here, we're going to change everything. And it really could happen. And then there are other people who are thinking, well, if only we could, get these people under control a little bit more, things would be great. We just need more guns. So yeah, you look back at any time, and even the ones that didn't feel that calm might seem calm when you look back at them, and then sometimes, like my year between, I got to go to college, between high school and college, Vietnam was going full score, and there was the Democratic Convention that turned into a riot, and that's oh geez, that's what we're doing.
Right. Speaking of that, we talked a little bit. I'm looking at, the breadth of your career. Did you start writing novels first, or was Secaucus 7? Had you written novels before you'd done Secaucus?
Yeah, I was, I had a bunch of just kind of jobs, and I was sending out short stories to magazines, very often totally inappropriate for the magazine. I remember sending one to a quarterly called Ararat, and they wrote back very nicely, because I usually just got a rejection slip, and they said, we really liked your story, but Ararat is the Armenian National Quarterly. And there are no Armenians in your story, and so you learn those things. And I got lucky enough to get a novel published when I was 25, and immediately went back and was glad I still had my factory job because it didn't pay that much. But eventually, what happened is getting short stories and a couple novels published meant that I got an agent, and that agent said, well, our agency is representing your book as a possible movie out in Hollywood. And I said, well, nobody's going to make this into a movie, but what's the name of that agency? And I got an agency and started to write screenplays. And that basically led to me having enough money to finance and make my first movie. So it was kind of like the two have fed each other over the years.
And the first ones, like famously, Piranha, the Roger Corman, those were the ones that they paid for Secaucus 7?
Yeah, Roger Corman at that time was a signatory to the Writers Guild. He later quoted, he wasn't a signatory to the Directors Guild, so I got paid more than the director did. And their minimum was $10,000. And in about a year, I wrote 3 screenplays for him. So I had $30,000 in the same place at the same time, and a friend I had worked in a summer theater that he ran. He said, "Well, we know all these good actors. When are you going to have $30,000 in the bank at the same time again?" And I said, "Probably never. So let's make a movie." I did get audited by the IRS and learned that you can't just write the whole $30,000 off in the year that you spend it. So I paid a few fines.
And talk about how that, even like the subject, if you haven't seen it, because it feels like it's so, we talked about how it's so germane for today, this group of people that...
Yeah, I had, there was the practical side and then the kind of, what's the story I want to tell side. The practical side was I had a bunch of friends who were really good actors who were all turning 30. And so I said, well, maybe my story, my movie should have something to do with people turning 30. And it should be contemporary because that's easier to, you know, people could wear their own clothes. But I'd seen a couple things in like Time magazine, places like that, about, oh, the 60s generation are you know, they're working for banks now and they're all selling out, which was so not the story of the people I knew. Many of them had, you know, been in the Peace Corps or the domestic Peace Corps. You know, almost all of the men that I knew were not going to make as much money as their husbands had made, as their fathers had made. You know, and that was a choice that they were making. A lot more of the women were going to have careers. They weren't going to, you know, have kids and not work outside of the home. So I just felt, well, there's a lot going on here. There's a story there, but you know, how can I, well, if it's a 3-day weekend and these people who knew each other when they were doing more radical things, but they're trying, you know, it's the return of the Secaucus 7. They're trying to hold on to this, you know, to their ideals. People ask me about The Big Chill, and I always say, well, you know, Larry Kasdan, he's about contemporary of mine. There's some, you know, talk that we were separated at birth because we've both written articles where we talk about that our you know, biggest influence was Roberto Clemente, the Pittsburgh Pirate ball player. But he just said, you know, most of the people he knew were radical in college and then they went to work for banks or whatever, you know, and it's called The Big Chill for a reason. It's about people realizing, well, maybe we never even had those ideals.
I didn't realize till today, reading about E.T., your connection to E.T. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's a very minor connection. I was hired by Steven Spielberg's company to write a movie based on some research that he'd done when he was doing Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He was going to produce it. He wasn't going to direct it. And at the time, it was called Watch the Skies. And I wrote this movie that was kind of like Drums Along the Mohawk with ETs instead of Native Americans, you know, outside of the cabin in the besieged farm family or whatever. And it never got made, and kind of in the shuffle, he rethought it and thought, well, you know, what if I do something that's more like a kid's movie or something like that? And the last page of mine was the one nice ET, because the others were the ones that were like mutilating cattle and stuff like that, and wanted to, you know, kidnap this kid who was on the spectrum because they wanted to see how his mind worked. The one nice one gets left behind by the other nasty ETs, and the last line is something like, and he wanders into the woods, a stranger in a strange land, which is kind of the first shot of, you know, the first scene anyway of E.T. And at one point they even, you know, said, you know, we're thinking of doing something different, and I was busy making that movie, and but they sent me the screenplay, and I realized, well, there's one page of connection here, and Melissa Matheson, who wrote the screenplay, did a terrific job, and so I'm not going to ask for any credit here. I'm going to go see this movie.
Now you regret that. You could have a private jet.
You know, if I wrote it, it might not have been that good. You know, it might have been a good movie, but it might not have, you know, taken off the way the movie did.
Right, no, of course. And also, and I'd forgotten about Born in the USA.
Yeah, we got very lucky. There was a couple connections. I had used some Bruce Springsteen songs with his permission in Baby It's You, a movie I made. And then Maggie Renzi, her sister, is a choreographer, and she had gotten to use a bunch of his song for a dance movie that she made for PBS. And if it's for PBS, you don't have to pay for movie music rights, which is why Ken Burns' documentaries are full of like Rolling Stones for 5 seconds. And, you know, it's free. So because of those, you know, when it came time for Bruce to actually be in one of the videos made of his things, somebody mentioned my name. Oh yeah, that guy, try him. And so we did Born in the USA, Glory Days, and I'm on Fire. which were all fun. Bruce kind of had the ideas for what the story would be, and I got to cut to Bruce Springsteen music, which was a great editing experience. And it was kind of, a window into, oh my God, he was so famous at that moment. That when we'd go out to shoot somewhere in New Jersey, there would be helicopters from radio stations following us, telling all the fans we were turning left on Route 17.
That's incredible. Oh, and Courtney Cox, wasn't she the...
She was in the one that Brian De Palma, Dancing in the Dark.
Dancing in the Dark, sorry.
But he didn't appear in it, except as himself.
Right. I was thinking about, if you've heard, I just heard the song today of, Bruce Springsteen's got a song about ice. That have you heard it?
Yeah, he did the one, what was it, 61 shots or something when they shot that guy in New York who was like reaching for his wallet or something.
And he just did one today, just dropped today about ice, and I was thinking you should do a video for it.
If they still do videos. Yeah, there was a golden age of videos. I was interviewed recently, somebody talking about the golden age of videos. I said, God, was that in the 50s? When is that?
Let's talk a little bit about I've heard you say it's some stories that had begun as television stories or projects that you converted?
Yeah, things have drifted from one into another. So my last two novels, Jamie McGillivray and To Save the Man, were both screenplays, movies that I wanted to make. We could never raise the money to get them made. And then they sat there for 10, 15, 20 years. And I just, it was such a good story. I got to do something with that. And then looked at it. And then what tends to happen, because you're not making a 2-hour and 10-minute movie anymore, they tend to be able to expand. Right. And you can afford to do things in print that you couldn't afford to do on the screen.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. And even also I teach screenwriting in the grad school in Columbia. And I tell people, especially now, to go the other way, if you write the IP of it, if you write the book, then you have total control over this, and then let someone else, you take the guesswork out of the imagination. You let them love the story, and then have someone pay you to adapt it.
Yeah, I have adapted, books and, newspaper articles and things like that. They're very different. You can be true to something, to the feeling of it, but it's very hard to be, especially a novel, and especially a novel that's over about 150 pages. It's really hard to be true to it. You're going to have to cut some things out, probably some characters. You may have to just take a couple chapters from it and say, this is, I think my favorite, Tony Kushner wrote the script for Lincoln. And Spielberg wanted to make a movie about Lincoln, but what did he do? There's so much Lincoln, so many things that, it's like a 3-year miniseries or something. He chose Lincoln trying to get one bill passed. Right. And you get a real feel for the guy and for the Civil War and what was going on. That's often what you have to do when you have a good big novel. The thing is, a short story of mine turned into one of my movies. A 4-page section of Union Dues turned into Mate One. So sometimes there's something there that you want to explore further. So you can get things out. Two things that really separate because you use some of the same muscles. Writing a screenplay, even though a lot of people don't see movies this way anymore, if you're writing a feature film, I write it to be experienced in one sitting. It's going to be 2 hours, whatever the time is. That's how you're going to experience. So there's a relationship with time that you don't have in a book that's this long. I hope nobody is going to read this in one sitting. So you're forgetting about that thing of, we're 15 minutes into the movie. Is there something that people should know that they don't know yet? Are they wondering about the right things already? So you have a little more time in a novel. And then the other thing that's different is when you're writing a screenplay that either you or somebody else is going to direct. Well, they're not the only audience, and they're not the only person who's going to be making the movie. There's cinematographers, there's the people who write the score, there's the actors' interpretation, even if they don't change any of the dialogue. You know, there's the production designer, there's the costumer. All these people with talents that you don't have to have. You have to just kind of say, bring me 3 choices and pick your favorite one and send them in the right direction. So a lot of the research that I would do for a book like this, if it had started as a screenplay, I'd say, well, we're going to see it. You know, let the art department, you know, do all that research about how did they make a car in 1936.
Right. I was like when I first started writing, you know, I began as a novelist. I guess I was doing both sort of back and forth at the same time. But the first book I read to learn how to write a screenplay was Thinking in Pictures, which I think is a super helpful book. Can you talk a little bit about it?
It's called Thinking in Pictures, The Making of Mate One. And it's not a how-to book. It's not, you know, this is what you have to do if you're going to make a movie. It's, here are the things you have to think about and make your choices, and they're all choices, you know, and they start with a screenplay and they end with the editing and the sound mixing and those kind of things. Just, you know, okay, what if everybody here was wearing black and armbands? That's a different scene. You know, what if we knew somebody had put a bomb under this stage before, and here we are yattering on, and, you know, if we only said, that's it, folks, and you can get out, some lives would be saved. You know, all those little details, that goes up on the screen, and you have to think about them. You know, what if there was music playing? What if there was scratching music playing that was kind of distorted? What if the lighting was worse? All those things, you know, affect, you know, what the dialogue is and what the action is.
And also, I was thinking that you were a bit of as a novelist and screenwriter and director and filmmaker, a bit of a unicorn. I think if today with Noah Hawley or Miranda July, it feels like maybe there's a little, there's a more, do you find there's more
I think that more people who are going to do something that's off Hollywood feel like, I guess I have to direct this if it's going to be done the way that I want it to be done. Right. You know, and even, you know, I was lucky I was an actor. You know, I had directed things on stage, so I had worked with actors quite a bit, which most people who graduate from film school have not. You know, so I had that advantage. But Miranda July was a performer, you know, and a writer, and she figured out how to direct, and she did very well at it, you know, but her stuff is not mainstream in any way. And so if you read a script by her without her name on it, it would be, well, that's weird, you know, and then you see the movie and say, oh, I get it. You know, so there is that kind of thing where I think that if you're going to make a genre movie, and it's going to be very much like other genre movies, like the stuff that you know Netflix will put out in the horror genre movie or whatever, you probably could have the first draft written by AI, even though our guild is keeping them from doing that. Right.
Yeah, I think a lot about how AI. The good part about AI is that it makes us be like, what can I write that a machine cannot write?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, every screenwriter is an AI machine. Every movie we've ever seen and every book we've ever read, it's in there, and we're sampling it all the time. We may not even know it when we're doing it, and every once in a while, that looks familiar. Yeah. You know, I've had a few of those where I write a little paragraph and I say, oh God, you know, who am I stealing from? And at this point, it's usually me. They say, oh, I think I've written that before.
Yeah, I forget some great anecdote, like some story. Have I done that before? And sometimes I really like it. I'll tell it again anyway, like in a different way.
Yeah, it may fit in what you need to do at the moment.
What's next? What are you working on next?
What's next? I've already written another book. I'm usually a year ahead of the publisher, if not 2. I wrote a book called Gods of Gotham, that's set in in the Catskills in New York City between 1949 and 1951. So it's got a little bit of On the Waterfront and a little bit of West Side Story. Puerto Ricans are starting to come in big things. There's a lot of politics in it. There's a pretty good mayor, but he's got some shady stuff in his past. It's got the City College basketball scandal in it. When City College, it was back when the NIT and NCAA tournaments, you could be in both of them, and they were the big college tournaments at the end of the regular season. And City College, which had no scholarships to give out, won both tournaments with 8 Jewish kids and 4 black kids, every one of them the son of an immigrant. And despite winning all their games in the tournaments, had kind of an up and down season. And then within a year, it was discovered that they'd been shaving points for gamblers' money. And so they were kind of thrown out of basketball forever, and had to kind of live that down for the rest of their lives. And it's also in the book is the beginnings of television, and the beginning of television being a major factor. So I talk about radio here, and it was a huge deal. It's forgotten now, but radio was a huge deal in its time. Father Coughlin, who was this anti-Roosevelt, anti-Semitic priest, he went national on radio. There were people who tuned in, Thursday night, 7 o'clock, they had their favorite show. You've written about Amos and Andy, it started as a radio show with a couple white guys doing the voices. Right. It was hugely popular, including with black people in many cases. So it's also the beginning of TV and TV news and political phenomenon going national because television covered it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. A wonderful Westport round of applause, John Sayles.
Thanks.
Thank you all for coming out. I think we're going to take we have questions. If anyone has some questions, they can come to the mic over to the right.
You've got to walk over to a microphone and do it.
I lived in Detroit and around Detroit for, more than 70 years. I just moved here recently. And you have a real native understanding of the area. I wondered if you lived in the area for a while to do your research, because you got everything right.
Yeah, in some ways, I could write this book, but I couldn't write the book about Detroit right now because I don't live there. So this book is between 1927, 1942. 3 of the newspapers that were their big newspapers still exist. There were people writing about it at the time who lived there, who grew up there. One of their mayors wrote a very good book about growing up in Black Bottom. And the same thing with Fordlandia. There's a lot of stuff on that. So in a way, when you go into the past, you're researching. You could go there now and, that used to be that, or there's something used to be there. So a lot of this for me, my interest in Detroit really started in 1980. I got to cover the Republican convention, which was at the Joe Louis Center.
I remember.
And I'd known, I knew the 68 riot, I kind of knew that stuff from the news. Got to walk around the city some, and one of the things that really struck me, and I could tell, just like my own city, it was having hard times. There were a lot of empty houses. There, the big industry had moved out mostly, and the ones that were left were on their way out. The Republicans were so worried about scaring their delegates that they put most of them up in Windsor on the Canadian side and bussed them in every day to the Lewis Center. And not only that, they put cardboard in the windows.
They did.
So that they wouldn't see anything.
It was like a Potemkin village almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that really struck me. One of the most interesting things about this is not only, because you can look at it now, both Paradise Valley and Black Bottom, they're gone. Those neighborhoods were very pointedly, oh, let's put some highways through here. And those people were spread to the four winds and had no power anymore. And some of the cultural heart of Detroit disappeared with it. So that was, I had to get the kind of city maps of the time, go get a lot of photographs that were there. There was a guy who owned one of he was often, named the mayor of Paradise Valley, the unofficial mayor who ran a nightclub, and he wrote a memoir of his years there. So you do that kind of stuff to get the feel of the place. And then you try to reconstruct it as honestly as you can. And then it's kind of an acting exercise. Okay, I'm Polish American, I'm working on the assembly line. I'm kind of interested in this union thing, but I can't afford to lose my job. I got 3 kids. You got to put yourself in it, and then the characters develop as you're writing them.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I will say, and before I walk away, that it's a completely different city now. If anybody wants to see Detroit, it's an amazing place to visit.
And the Tigers were actually good for a couple years during this book.
Hi. I was wondering if there are any young filmmakers that you are of particular interest to you who are sort of picking up the mantle of like independent film, and you're like, oh wow, they're really interesting. I can't wait to see what they're going to continue to do.
I'm sure there's a lot of good ones. It's the hardest thing for movie makers now. The equipment's cheaper. People have gone to film school. When I was, of the age, there were like 3 film schools, and I didn't go to any of them. There was not much written about it. Now there are seminars online that you can go to, so you can actually give yourself a film school education. So I don't see that many independent films anymore. They just don't get to, Guilford, Connecticut. What I do see is people who started independently. The guy who made Sinners is a really interesting filmmaker. The guy who made, what is it called? His first movie was called Newlyweds, which was very funny. And then he made the one about the Black Judas, about Freddie Hampton getting killed.
Shaka King.
Shotgun King. He's a wonderful director. Zoe Chow, who did Hamnet this year, she really started as almost a documentarian and then said, well, these are such interesting people. Maybe I'll write a story, but they'll basically play themselves. And she's moved into features, and Hamnet is a wonderful adaptation. She sat down with the author of the book, but it's very different than the book and really works as a movie. So there are people, who, the Safdie brothers, they're now working separately. They've got, one of them has a movie out now with, what's his name?
Timothy Chalamet.
Timothy Chalamet, who's in every other movie, but who's a very good actor, so thank you. He's got a movie that's getting attention now. What's the guy's name who thanked the sex workers of America when he won the...
Sean Baker for Honora.
Honora, yeah. He didn't just arise. He's been making movies for years. That was like his 6th movie or something. So there are those people coming up, which makes you feel, thank God somebody got through.
Right, thank you.
Nice to see you, Mr. Sayles. I was going to ask you about movies too, although I look forward to reading your book. And 34 years ago, when I moved to this town, we could drive 20 minutes east or west and find lots of theaters to watch independent movies. Not a one of them exists today. And one of them in Fairfield, when I saw your movie Lone Star, which, if anybody's not seen Lone Star, you've got to find a way to see that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. And I'm trying to find where I watch your movies or buy your movies, because you've done a few I haven't seen. I've seen Passion Fiche, as you say in the movie, and Sunshine State, but I haven't seen Mate One. I haven't seen the Secaucus 7. Where can we see these, buy these, or otherwise get our hands on these movies? They're awfully, awfully good.
Yeah, well, thank you. It is difficult to find movies. even if you think you bought one, if you don't own a physical copy of it, you may have just leased it for a while, and someday you're going to want to see it again and say, oh no, that expired 2 years ago. There is a website on the computer called Just Watch. And you go to that, and they tell you whether it can be seen anywhere. You know, sometimes it can only be seen on, you know, some, you know, streamer that you don't happen to have. So if you have a friend who has that streamer, you could go over there. Lone Star is in the Criterion collection. So, you know, if they're showing it that month, or if you know, want to buy the DVD from them, you can do that. But yeah, they're very spread out. Especially with independent movies, generally, you know, whoever distributed it back in you know, 1979 and 80, they went out of business, and another company bought that library, and then they went out of business, and you know, so they often end up at something like MGM, which is now owned by some big other corporation, which have no idea what they own.
Right.
So you know, these things can disappear. So yeah, I think Just Watch, and then there's another website called Missing Movies, which are, there were a lot of very well-known filmmakers and very well-known films that just became unavailable. So, you know, that they will kind of say whether the things are available or where you might have to go looking to find them.
Well, thanks for the tip. I subscribe to the Criterion Channel. Now, do your movies come on and off? I guess they don't show them all the time.
Yeah, well, it depends on what service, you know, has the, you know, lease on them or owns the rights to show them. So with the Criterion collections, every month they kind of change what they're going to, and they'll say leaving. That doesn't mean that they don't have it anymore. They may still have the rights to show it, but it won't pop up for a while on their playlist.
And there are a lot of films here on Bill, like in Canopy, right? With your library card, you can log into Canopy with a K, K-A-N-O-P-Y, and they have amazing, especially sort of a deep bench of great older films.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming. This was great. The politics of labor have reemerged in the last couple of years in America in a way that felt absent for the past several decades. So many of your movies, of which I'm a huge fan, and now your novel, which I will promptly read starting tonight, are about that struggle in one way or another. And whether it was the election of Mamdani in New York this past November, or the emergence of the Democratic Socialist as a major movement within the Democratic Party, this will be the story that I think will be accelerated, put on steroids, you know, your metaphor here, in the age of AI. And I'm not one to question like why people want to tell the stories they tell. You chose to write a period piece, but is there something inherently cinematic or literary about the moment we're living in as it relates to the kind of characters and labor struggles you've long written about, and does it interest you?
Yeah, well, one thing is that I'm interested in, as opposed to most mainstream movies, the complexity of a situation. And the union situation has always been complex. If you look at just the UAW, which I deal with in this book, the Ruther brothers, they went to Russia together, and they worked in Russian factories, and they came back and saying, well, we love the political situation, but they don't know how to make cars, you know, and then they went on to, you know, be really pretty much progressives and radicals within this union, but by the end, you know, they were the old fogies. You know, they were the people who, in the 50s, purged all the left-wingers out of the union because it was basically put to them, you want to have a union, you want to get your contract, get rid of those guys.
Right.
Another complicating factor, which actually makes for interesting movies, is that because they were, until 1933 or 4, when Roosevelt really kind of came in thinking unions are not a bad idea, unions were not protected at all. Right. So the police were against them. the state was against them, the country was against them, and so they were easy prey for gangsters. And so a lot of unions got not infiltrated, but taken over by gangsters. And that started to blacken the reputation of unions, and guys were killed because they wouldn't play ball. Guys who were trying to reform unions ended up dead. That's the case if you ever saw on the waterfront. That's what it was based on, a reform guy in one of the waterfront unions who ended up buried somewhere in New Jersey. So that complexity always interests me. And just on a human level, not a syndicalist level, this idea that a bunch of people with coming from all kinds of different places can get together and do something together,
Right.
is pretty amazing when it works. Make one, you had the hill people and the black people up from Alabama and the immigrants coming from Italy in that case. They got together only because they had a common enemy who was so outrageously bad that they realized the only way we're going to survive this is to come together. And when those enemies go away, very often those unions start to fall apart.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and I want to thank you, John, for making us a stop on your book tour. And Trey, thank you for continuing to work with us. It's a real honor. So another round of applause for John and Trey, please.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
And we will have copies of Crucible for sale, and Mr. Sayles will be signing, so please step over.